Good morning, Emily.
Hey Dan,
Oh, well, it says Emily on my script here. Sorry. Good morning, Dan.
it's good to hear from you, Dan. Uh, Today we're going to be talking about unearthing real goals with families, the importance of dual spousal participation, and what great financial planning looks like.
Welcome to the Science of Wealth, where we discuss the science behind financial planning and the art of learning and applying it. All right, unearthing real goals with families, dual spousal participation, which sort of is a requirement for unearthing real goals with families, and what great financial planning looks like. It feels like we're going to be talking about a fantastical place. We're gonna talk about like Narnia or Nirvana or something like that. If these are the topics we're talking about, so hit me. What do we want to talk about first?
I want to talk about goals. I think goals in and of itself is just an abstract word. We come to clients and say, hey, what are your goals? What do you want to accomplish? What do you want your life to look like? And, some families and folks do have things they want to achieve, whether it's purchase a house, send their kids to college, or retire. I think for the most part, those are great benchmarks. However, sometimes it's difficult to challenge families to push further than that. So instead of, okay, you'd like to retire, what would you like to do in retirement? And I think we and also families tend to struggle in terms of articulating what these goals look like. So I wanted to talk about it with you. And first and foremost, maybe just even define what is a goal when we're talking to clients about their financial plans.
And a goal is ultimately the outcome. What are we attempting to accomplish through the process of financial planning or anything else we're trying to do? You give a couple of good examples here where we say, what not just retire, but what does retirement look like? Where we want to get into the nitty and gritty of that. The analogy I always think of in this context is a lot of people want to be fit. They want to work out or do something active and eat right and be healthy. And they want to have a certain quality of physical fitness as a result of that. But if you went to a professional trainer and you said, hey, I want to be fit, their first question is going to be, okay, in what way? Do you want to be fast? Do you want to be strong? Do you want to have low body fat? Do you want to be good at swimming? Do you want to be able to lift a lot of stuff? Like what actually are we attempting to accomplish here? And so when we think about goals in the context of financial planning, things like retire or pay for my kids' college or be financially independent are really, really broad umbrella descriptions and are going to end up being very, very uniquely tailored.
Interesting. Okay, so with clients and families, they have these super abstract goals. Are there any ways that we can converse with families to try to get them to have more, attainable and relevant goals to their situations?
Sure. So let's use the example of paying for college or paying for kids' education. Often, a question we're going to ask is, have you discussed, right? Speaking to this client or this client and their spouse, and they're both clients in that context, and asking, have you discussed or thought about what education looks like for your kids? And they will often have one of two responses: either an incredibly specific response or a very indistinct and undefined response. Now, the thing that can emerge from that is that, particularly if it's a couple and not just an individual as the client, they may have very different visions of what paying for kids' education looks like. Often, one or both spouses will have paid for their own education, which will lead them to have feelings like, well, I paid for mine, they can pay for theirs. Conversely, they may have had theirs paid for, and they may feel like that obligates them to pay for the next generation, or vice versa. Some people say, student debt has been crushing to me, and I don't want my kids to deal with that. Other people sort of have, I'm going to be a little judgy here and call it an entitled attitude. Like, yeah, my parents paid for my education, but like my kids are on their own. There's a whole range kind of between A and B there, but functionally, when we ask that question, we're asking a values question, right? Do you value paying for your children's education, improving their human capital such that they will have a better life as a byproduct of the education you may support them in obtaining? So that's sort of the foundational question. When we then get past the point of, either on one end of the spectrum, we're going to pay for all the college, or the other end of the spectrum, we're going to pay for none of the college, right, or whatever the future is, then there's different conversations to be had there. So let's think about the example of the pay for all the college. Okay, you say you want to pay for your kids' education. do you have a benchmark in mind for what that actually means in practice? So, for example, do you see yourself paying for them to go to CU Boulder for 4 years? Is that the type of cost we want to benchmark savings and accumulation towards? Or is it more indistinct? Is it, hey, we would pay for 2 years of school anywhere, or 4 years of school anywhere? Or is it any 4 year school in state? Or is it any 4 year school anywhere? What about grad school? What about law school or med school? So, all these sort of variations of college, or we'll pay for some amount of college, but which college, how much college, sort of becomes the conversation there. For the parents who say, our kids are on their own, we're not going to pay for this, then I sort of have to bifurcate into the, is this a putting your oxygen mask on first conversation, or is this a I don't want to conversation? Because I think there's a very big difference there. The oxygen mask conversation is just reality. Not everybody makes a huge amount of money, and not everybody can afford to pay for their kids' college. That's just a reality. In that particular circumstance, hey, you're on your own, your kids are going to be on their own. Okay, let's have a conversation, not necessarily about financial support, but what support you can lend them that doesn't strain your finite financial resources. Conversely, if it's a we don't want to pay for college, okay, tell me more about that. Is it because you just think they should have to fend for themselves? Is it because you don't want to pay for it in general? Is it because you think college is a waste of money and they're going to be indoctrinated into crazy person, Marxist behaviors or something like that? Like what is the rationale here? And if it's not a financial rationale, if it's more of a beliefs rationale, okay, that's fine. Let's shift the conversation away from education. Let's learn about how you might want to support them into becoming an adult, whether that's helping them get their first job, sending them to a trade school, helping them get their first home out of your home, helping them pay for their wedding, car, whatever it is, right? What other kind of support that's maybe not college do you want to lend to your children when they're ready to transition into independence?
That's excellent. I think there's a lot of really good stuff in there, and it kind of reminded me of an acronym I believe I used to use when I was creating goals. It's the SMART acronym. So goals should all be, let me try to do this here: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. So even to use the example that you just said, specific. Where do you want to send the child to college? Private, public, measurable. How much would you like to save? Attainable. Is it actually feasible given your financial means and resources? Relevant. Is the child going to go to college? And time bound. How many years do we intend to pay for such an expense, or how many years until we have to incur this expense? I think the last part I wanted to bring up here was kind of just bringing this back to this almost the concept of like mimetic desire, where we like and want to seek things out simply because we see other people seeking them out. And I think one of the ones we see with a lot of clients is travel. And I mean this, and traveling is lovely. And of course, everybody would like to travel and see beautiful things. However, a lot of folks like to say they travel, and then we work with them for a year, 3 years, 5 years, and I'd say rarely are those folks traveling as much as they sought out to when we had first started that conversation. And I think there might, for some families, just be a little bit of, well, everybody says they want to travel, so maybe I should just say they want to travel. Whether it's for your specific practice, Dan, or just in general, how hard will you sometimes push if you get the impression a client might be giving you a fluff answer simply because they haven't thought about it independently?
So I'll push pretty hard, but not in a way that makes them feel under pressure. Because the point is not to make them stressed, by digging and digging and digging. The point is to really elucidate a more specific set of objectives. So when somebody says they want to travel, immediate questions from me like, "Oh, do you see that being domestic, international, both?" And they'll often, have a very quick answer to that. They'll say, "Oh, really just here in the States," or "Yeah, I love the idea of going overseas." Okay, and talk to me about the quality of travel. Is that, are we staying in 5-star resorts, or are we taking hostels and buses everywhere? How do we see ourselves, enjoying that experience? And they'll have their feeling, I don't want to sleep in the dirt, or I would love to sleep in the dirt, right? I want to go camping and take a 6-day backpacking trip to Machu Picchu. Right? They'll have these different gradients of experience that really drive kind of the quality there. And then the execution point, where I don't necessarily need to dig much further than that, is I can go look at their expenses and their history of spending and say, okay, when you say you want to travel internationally all the time, do I see this behavior already? and does it fit within your means? Now, again, back to sort of a scarcity thing. If they don't have the financial resources to do it, if it's aspirational, that's different. But if this is a person who's got, or a household that has, $80,000 of money just left over every year, and they're accumulating like crazy, then that becomes a conversation about permission. Hey, you say you want to travel internationally 2, 3 times a year. I don't see that spending in your spending history, and you have a lot of money left over. And as a financial planner, I love to see a lot of money left over that we could save and invest and deploy. But let me ask you, is there any reason that we're not doing that today? And there's sometimes then a secondary layer of conversation. Well, I do want to travel internationally. I'm not spending on it because we haven't discussed this yet. I'm actually providing a lot of direct support to one of my parents. And I'm worried that if I leave, if I'm gone for a long time, that something could happen to them. Okay, let's spend more time talking about that, because travel may be a true goal for some people, but there may be confining factors that sort of get in the way, where now we have a hierarchy of goals, right? I would love to do X, Y, and Z, but X becomes a priority over Y, becomes priority over Z. And so though I love to do all of them, sometimes one is gatekeeping the other.
I think that leads perfectly into the next conversation or topic I wanted to talk about here, which was dual spousal participation, because I think that goes hand in hand with creating smart or just relevant goals to your situation. And for our firm specifically, when engaging in financial services as a married household, we do require both spouses to be in those initial consults and the beginning steps of those plans. Could you explain maybe a little bit why, Dan, we're so firm on that as a requirement?
Absolutely. There's actually a huge, huge variety of reasons here. So I'll try to lay out a couple of sort of salient highlight points. Number one, you may have different objectives. You may be a team, a couple, you're on the same side, but you may have different objectives or different visions of what outcomes look like. Number one. Number two, sometimes those visions can be complementary, sometimes they can be contradictory. So we need to make sure that they line up. Number three, it is very important that both members of the household have a foundational understanding of the finances of the household. It is a huge, huge, huge risk to any household that you have a money management spouse and a knows nothing about money spouse. That's not to say that you can't have somebody who enjoys money in the household, who's happy to take on paying the bills and tracking the finances and so on, but the other spouse should not be completely ignorant as to what's going on, because it affects them in a direct sense, and it's very important that they at least understand. They don't have to like it, enjoy it, be passionate, but they do need to understand what's going on. And then finally, in that context, and this is just sort of a thing about having a client relationship, when there is an invisible third party in the conversation, so we have spouse A who's attending and spouse B who's never attending, we handicap the entire planning process via sort of the game of telephone tag, where I'm talking to spouse A is talking to me, I'm giving them advice or guidance, and then they're saying, great, I'll talk to spouse B about this. So they go home to their husband, wife, partner, whoever it is, and they say, hey, Dan said something like what I actually said, right? They say, so they describe it to the best of their ability, 80% accuracy. But because there's missing pieces there, it may not deliver well to spouse B. Spouse B might sit there and go like, well, that doesn't make sense to me. And spouse A is like, well, now that I'm trying to remember exactly what they said, and now that I've articulated it in, not quite correctly to you, and now we're having conversations based on the incorrect articulation, I too don't quite understand it. So then we end up coming back to us and saying, I talked to my partner and they don't think it makes sense, or they don't like it, or they don't want to do that, and now that I think about it, I'm not sure that I want to either. Can you re-explain it to me? All right, so can we, and I hate to put it this way, but can we waste some time re-articulating what we already agreed to or thought was a good idea previously when we were both in the room, to arrive at the same place that we were before we did this, in which, unless spouse B has come to this conversation, is now participating, I will now once again go back to my spouse and attempt to re-articulate it again, and hopefully I'll articulate it better this time, and maybe we will or will not take action as a result of that point of articulation.
Well said. I think the first part you brought up was it's really crucial and important for families. We see and hear about it all the time. There's one spouse who is, the DIYer. They love to do the financial planning themselves, whether it's the investment management, shopping insurance, or everything in between. And that's all well and good. However, if that spouse is to pass and has not included the other spouse in any part of the financial planning engagement, how do you see that going? I don't see it going well. In fact, I have some personal experience with these types of things, and they tend to go very poorly. And you can make the argument that that spouse actually did a very poor job with the financial planning because they failed to plan for a succession and what would happen if something poor were to happen, which is what financial planning really is all about. So let's say you do have one spouse that is a DIYer or likes and enjoys financial planning, and the other spouse really has no interest, but they know, they've talked to you and they've heard the podcast. They know they should be involved. So for a spouse that is uninterested, what is the minimum level of engagement you'd like to see from the uninterested party?
I want them to be in the meeting. And that sounds like a very flat thing, right? Just like, oh, that's it. So you want them to waste their time sitting and listening to the conversation? Yeah, I want them to be in the meeting. They don't have to assert opinions. They don't have to share ideas. They don't have to ask questions. But I want them in the meeting, and I don't want them reading a book, a magazine on their phone. I want them to sit there and listen. And I have a client, and this client, if they listen to this, is going to know exactly that I'm talking about them. I have a client who can make it about 10 minutes in a meeting, and after that is absolutely ready to be done with that conversation, who, nevertheless, for many years now, has sat in every single meeting with them and their partner and myself and listened, and again been bored to tears, absolutely disinterested about 10, 15 minutes into it, but it still takes part in the conversation. And that has yielded significant dividends because every once in a while there is a thing that they want to have a serious direct input in, and that's very important that they've been part of the conversation up to this point, that they're not getting it secondhand. That creates a buffer of understanding, that creates a buffer of opportunity to step in or raise their voice when something comes up, and also make sure they're not left out. But in contrast to that, there are some client couples who essentially spouse A comes every time spouse B doesn't come, and they've sort of agreed that that's how it's going to be. My sort of soft rule for that is, if we're going to formalize that, if spouse A is going to be the finance partner and spouse B is just never going to participate, okay, two things. One, spouse B still gets CC'd on everything. Right? I at least want it in their inbox. I want to annoy them with this information and education and context, because even if they don't really want it, they do need it. And the second thing is that they have ceded their vote to their partner. So if ever it turns into a spouse A saying, well, I'm going to go back to spouse B and we'll discuss it, no. If that's how it's going to be, then they need to be here for the conversation in the first place. What I'm not going to do is play a game where we have these sort of disjointed conversations like I described earlier, where you and I come to an agreement as as client and planner, and then you're going to go back to a third party who's otherwise disinterested and get their buy-in, only to then come back and potentially say, well, they didn't buy in because they haven't been here for the last 6 conversations, and so they don't understand why we're doing this, and now they're concerned. Well, their time to be concerned was for the last 6 conversations. So in that context, if somebody's going, if a couple is really going to say, we want to have a finance partner and a non-finance partner, okay, but then you are proxying your vote to the finance partner, and in an applied practical sense, do they get to complain? Yeah. I mean, I can't actually stop that from happening, but let's be very, very clear about the expectations of that if we're going to formalize a relationship in which only one of you is going to be an interested party.
There used to be a family I worked with back in the day where one spouse, the spouse that actually was the breadwinner, did not care at all. But he would sit in on pretty much every meeting. And I remember after about a year, we somehow drifted away from talking about actual numbers and the plan, and instead started talking about the vision. And if you close your eyes, what would your life look like in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? And I don't know what happened, but there was a weird switch that almost went off in his head where all of a sudden we started talking about the things you can achieve from what we're doing right now. And that spouse became infinitely more interested as a result. And because of that, their relationship and the relationship we had mutually benefited considerably. And I think their financial plan also benefited as a result, which I think is a wonderful segue to the third topic, which is simply what good financial planning or what great financial planning looks like. It's a unique profession, and I know you know this, and that sometimes it can be difficult for us or for families to quantify the value that we provide. Sometimes or oftentimes, we can spend anywhere from 1 to 3 hours doing analysis for a client simply for the answer to be, you don't need to make any changes at this time, or we're keeping everything the same, which to them, can sometimes probably seem a little weird because we're not doing anything, but that doesn't mean work isn't getting done, especially when you compare it to, say, medicine or accounting. Medicine, if you feel better, positive outcome. Accounting, if your taxes are filed appropriately, good outcome. However, for financial planning, it can be a little more squishy sometimes. So let's say we're taking a new family through this process from beginning to end. What does great financial planning look like?
I mean, you somewhat already described it. It's getting to a stage of trust where we're really past talking about numbers. We're not talking about the portfolio in security specific detail. We're not getting into the nitty gritty. We're having a conversation about where we are, what we're experiencing, how we're enjoying life. We're having a conversation about how we're getting towards our goals or our proximity to goals or how our goals have changed. And otherwise, you're essentially leaving it to us to fill in the blanks in the background. That is the sort of fundamental good relationship. And I think that applies to just about every professional relationship you could have, right? You go to your doctor, you tell them what may or may not be wrong. They run some tests. You have an enjoyable conversation with them during those tests and through that process, and they prescribe or diagnose or provide a treatment that cures any ailments you're experiencing. You talk to an attorney, your attorney gets the context from you, says, I'll take care of it. They take care of it, right? Think about any professional relationship in which you don't feel a need to interrogate the professional about the details. You have such trust in the relationship with them that you can have a human language conversation, not a technical conversation, and they in turn take care of your problems for you so sufficiently that you are no longer concerned about them. You don't have any stress or anxiety around them, and you implicitly trust them to do it right. That is an ideal planning relationship from the standpoint that a client has clarity of their vision with us, has shared that vision with us. We are helping them implement it directly. And from that standpoint, every conversation is essentially implicitly everything's good. Yep, everything's good. Are we going to do X, Y, and Z? Yes, we are. Do I need to do anything? Nope, you're fine. Okay, great. And that is an easy place to get to. You mentioned sort of the thing about having conversations with clients where we don't do anything, right? Where the conclusion of the conversation is everything is fine, status quo is good, we don't need to make any adjustments, and how sometimes somebody might view that as sort of a maybe a negative, where they go, well, shouldn't we be doing something? And I think the basic example here would be, if you were plotting a course, you're on a spaceship, you're on a ship, you're walking through the mountains, the hills, whatever, but you're heading in the correct bearing, the correct azimuth. You're pointed at the destination perfectly, and you're on your way to that destination. How long do you have to be on that perfect journey before you sort of boredom or anxiety stirs you to do something to disrupt that course? And that's an interesting human question because fundamentally, if we're doing financial planning right, we are always pointed at the objective and we're in alignment towards that objective. And if the objective changes, we're pivoting in the new direction towards the new objective. But at the end of the day, we should always be pointed in the right direction. And if markets get weird, if life events happen, whatever the case is, maybe we're being shaken out of place a little bit and where we're coming from is now changing. But at the end of the day, we should always be pointed in the right direction. So ideally, changes should be occurring because goals have changed or because circumstances have changed, but not because nothing has happened in a while.
I really like that analogy. I haven't heard that one from you before. So, in addition into the things that you've already discussed, without getting into personality differences between clients or anything, from a client or a potential client perspective, are there any things that you look for or that tend to trend well from a relationship standpoint, whether it's engagement, commitment, level of net worth, or are there any factors that you take into consideration from their perspective?
Yeah, there's a couple of factors sort of in the pre-meeting and in the meeting phase. In the pre-meeting, are they approaching the necessities for the preparation of the meeting with gusto? So we send out quarterly invitations to have a meeting. Are they getting all their data input and all their things updated within the first week and scheduling in the first week? Maybe their meeting's going to be in 3 months now, but they're just getting ahead on it. They're really engaged. They see an ask from us, hey, please provide us with X, Y, and Z. They're doing it, they're scheduling, they're on it, and they're very proactive about that. That's a great pre-meeting quality relationship. And then in the meeting context, how often are we having the same technical conversation versus how often are we having a pleasant general conversation about where we are and where we're going. So what I mean by that is, this is sort of an interesting observation. Broadly in the financial planning world, right, the vast majority of firms charge based on investment management. So you have to give them a portfolio, they charge you a percentage to manage it, and then they do planning on the side. Our model today is a bundle of financial planning and investment management. You don't have to let us manage things, but we will manage things for you. Historically, we had clients who did just investment, or we had clients who did just planning. And in that context, some people then, as we evolved our service model over time, made the decision to stay in those categories for any number of reasons. And that's fine. But the interesting thing is, we charge a certain amount for this bundle of planning and investment management. We charge a different amount for just investment. We charge a different amount for just planning. The great irony is, on some level, we probably, and there I know of some firms who do this, we actually should probably charge more for clients who do just investment or just planning. And the reason for that is there's not just a trust factor, not just revenue factor, there's actually an efficiency factor. Because when you say, I want to drive my own portfolio, or I want to take, I want to do my own planning, I just want you to handle the portfolio, whichever version it is. In either instance there, the issue that emerges is that often we are spending an enormous amount of time having a bespoke personal conversation about this person's particular plan or this person's particular portfolio that is being held away from us. We're either not doing the planning or we're not doing the portfolio thing. And it takes us far more time and energy to support that when we weren't just hands-on in the first place, when we weren't already doing the planning, already managing the portfolio. It's significantly less efficient because we get this semi-accurate self-reporting from this client about their portfolio position, or they present their planning questions and needs to us in a semi-accurate, incomplete data sense. And we're forced to either make approximations about the planning stuff. Hey, I don't have all the data, but I think this might be what works for you. Or in the case of portfolio stuff, thank you for that spreadsheet that you built me 2 weeks ago. I know that data is not accurate anymore, but now I have to advise you based on inaccurate data. And also, when I give you recommendations about you need to buy this or sell this or change this or whatever it is, I'm really depending on you to do that correctly and quickly, because the advice expires very, very rapidly. And so if you wait a week, my numbers are no longer accurate. If you do some of it but not all of it, you may not understand that part of my recommendation to buy this and sell that hinged on both of those things happening. But if you decide, well, he said to buy this, but I don't feel like selling that and hold on to it, maybe you just caused a tax problem that you didn't realize you were going to cause by doing that. So all that to say, back to the ideal planning conversation, planning relationship, it really is about that level of trust. It is about getting to a point where you are willing to entrust your family, right, your personal financial future to us, in the sense that you are willing to delegate what can be delegated to us, and that you take our advice implicitly. And that doesn't mean you can't ask questions or want to have a better understanding, but it's not a conversation of challenging and, well, why would we do this? It's okay. You understand me, you know me, you're giving me advice in my best interest. Okay, let's just do that. That's a really good place to get to with any professional.
And especially in this industry and with our client base, I think you can make an argument, while not perfect, there's a pretty direct correlation between commitment and trust clients have with us and the level of financial success or satisfaction they have with the relationship in their financial plan. So thanks for sharing all that, Dan.
Sure. I want to add one more thing onto that, and this is a little bit more for clients of other professionals and more importantly for those professionals themselves. I think most of us as professionals like to think of ourselves as A players. And statistically, that's impossible, right? There's a whole distribution of professionalism and quality. On this podcast, we've talked a lot about client trust. We've talked about the importance of the client experience, of the relationship, and all of that. And I just want to caution, it is a dangerous thing for anybody, a financial planner, accountant, lawyer, whoever you are, to think of yourself as a white glove A-list player when that is not what your clients experience. And so I bring all of that up in the context of this conversation about what great financial planning looks like, in that it should be a constant striving goal for every professional to deliver such quality service and such quality experience to their clients that functionally there's no such thing as an A client and a B client, that you can look at every client and say you are all A clients, truly, from a compensation standpoint, from a quality of relationship standpoint, from a ease of doing business with standpoint. You should not look at any client and think, that client is suboptimal for me. And that's hard to do. There's always going to be a sort of a favorite. Everybody has a favorite. There's always going to be a least favorite. Sorry, everybody has a least favorite. But in a perfect world, you don't have a big disparity in the quality of your client relationships, but that requires you to go above and beyond in delivering for your clients more than what they expect from you.
That's an important distinction to make, because we do strive on a daily basis to provide A-list white glove service to our clients. But I think whether it's our profession or other professions, you have to ask it, well, if are we providing that service? And if so, should we expect the same from our clients? Because if we're not, frankly, we don't deserve it.
Ooh, strong but fair. Strong but fair. All right, Daniel, with that, let's turn to your wisdom of the week. What is something you think our audience should hear or learn about or know?
So we work currently with about, I believe, a little bit less than 200 households, families, and small businesses in the area and around the United States. And I think one of the biggest wins we have kind of goes back to what we said earlier, in that we almost didn't do anything post-election with clients. We had a lot of clients call and share concerns about the short term and maybe some of the things that were of worry to them. However, I think one of our greatest achievements as a firm is that we were able to ease a lot of those concerns and let clients and families know they're still on the right path, and that the temporary declines in the market or in their sentiment are not permanent losses, unless we actually start to lock them in and sell. And I think that is a really nice aspect of what great financial planning looks like.
Couldn't have said it better myself. The Science of Wealth is produced by My Wealth Planners, a registered investment advisor in Colorado. The theme song is This Is Your Time by Dan Phillips. The podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not investment advice or any other form of advice. Not all material discussed on the podcast is appropriate for every individual in every circumstance, so you should consult with a certified financial planner, tax professional, or legal professional as appropriate before attempting to apply any of the subjects, strategies, or tactics discussed on the podcast.